Are you looking to buy a scooter for the summertime, but you're not sure if you're buying a good one or not? Well, stay tuned because I'm going to do a pre-purchase inspection on one and show you how to do it so you don't get screwed. Stay tuned. Alright, so here is the subject vehicle. This is probably what you're going to be pulling up to if you decide to come and look at something like this. So the first thing you want to do is start looking over the body of the scooter. So you're going to want to go around and look real close at all these body panels and keep track of things like these chips, other scratches here, parts of the body where they're not connected properly anymore, more scratches. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to down on my own vehicle necessarily, but there is evidence that it has been taken apart. There's also evidence that it has been dropped before. And so these are the kind of things that you want to look for when you are going to potentially purchase a used one. So now that we've kind of gone over the body, you're looking for scratches, you're looking for stuff that doesn't line up, stuff that's like really faded, things like that, and you can potentially talk them down a little bit depending on how bad the damage is. So another thing you want to look for is the interior, if you will. So the seat, check the leather, feel the leather, make sure it feels nice, fresh, whatever. That's an indication that they've taken care of it, put some sort of conditioner on it, and make sure there's no cracks, major rips, things like that. Another thing, back to the body, if you see stuff like this back here that's broken, it's not really connected anymore. These are not super strong plastics to begin with, but if you see something like this cracked back here, that could be an indication that they were, having someone a little too heavy sit on the back, because that's generally how that will break. It's just too much weight. You hit a bump and then the tabs that hold this together just totally break off. So we've kind of gone over the body, we've gone over the interior, and these are kind of basic things that anyone can do, whether they know about mechanic stuff or not, so far anyway. So the next thing we want to do is check out the mileage. And in most of these Chinese GY6 scooters, the miles are actually in kilometers. So this thing actually has just over 6,600 kilometers, because it's about 2/3. And then another thing you're looking for is modifications. Now, it's probably not a bad idea to look up the scooter that you're looking at and seeing what's normal, but I can show you, this windshield is aftermarket here. The heated seats are aftermarket. If I didn't know this scooter, I would see this switch and I would know that that's aftermarket. And the key fob on here does not normally come with it, so we know something else is going on with that. Upgrade or not, still a modification. Another thing that you may notice is there's a wire coming off your throttle here that's not normally there, and this grip has a switch on it for the heated grips. So just another thing to kind of look out for modification wise. Generally, it's a good thing if it has been modified, because you usually end up with some upgrades. But if it's been modified, it's possible the wiring has been messed with, So if you have any electrical issues, you may want to check into the aftermarket stuff that's been installed. Many of these, in fact, pretty much all of them also do not come with a charger. So, I mean, ultimately, if you see things like that, it's a good thing. But just know that if they have been heavily modified, they've likely been taken apart to a significant degree as well. And so, you know, you're kind of relying on the mechanic ability of the person that you're buying it from as far as its reliability. So it kind of just depends on if you trust that the person you're buying it from was likely a good mechanic or not. So we've gone over the body, and we've gone over the interior, and we've gone over modifications. Next thing we want to do is go over some basic functions. Another couple things I want to point out in regards to the gauge cluster. When I said when you're looking over the body and you're looking to see if stuff is faded or not, you want to look at this cluster here. If this looks really yellow, the cover over it, if it looks really faded yellow, not super clear and transparent like this one is, and then you also see that, you know, the paint is a little faded in a few spots, or even majorly faded, there is a high chance that that scooter has sat outside for a significant period of time. And for me, that is probably a red flag. I would not buy that scooter. And also, while we're on the subject of up here at the gauge cluster, this 9400 would actually be considered high miles on one of these. Many of these used you can buy for around 2, 3, or 4,000 kilometers on them. So if you see one that's got like 7, 8, 9, or even a number on the last digit there to the left, then that one's been ridden quite a bit. Now, high miles isn't necessarily a bad thing on these, because if it's reached such high miles, that means it's been ridden often, it hasn't just sat there, and it's likely been taken care of to a pretty good degree, because let's just be honest, many of these don't make it to the mileage that you see here. So just keep that in mind. If you see one with high mileage, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then, you know, to really like 3,000 or less is considered low, and then anything over like 6 or 7 would be considered high. All right, so moving on to some of the basic functions of the scooter. The first one, obviously, that most people are going to be concerned with is the starting. So generally, the handlebars are going to be turned all the way to the left, and the key is going to be kind of in that position, which is the lock position. That's one of the first features you'll become accustomed to when purchasing a scooter. So when you put the key in and turn it to the next spot, it is not on, it is just unlocked. So this is basically neutral in a sense. It's where you can kind of move it around or whatever without having to start it. Then of course the next setting is start. And then when I turn that on, you can of course see that my gauges light up and the fuel gauge will display. And so when you want to try to start one of these, you have to pull a brake and hit this button at the same time. And unfortunately, mine is not starting. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. If it doesn't start, that kind of sucks. And you may want to try to talk them down a little bit. These scooters have a notorious problem of batteries dying, even if they sit for a short period of time, and even if the battery is relatively new. So I would not pass on a scooter just because the electric start doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, I'll show you another way you can get it started. All right, so here's the scooter on its kickstand. That, I'm sure, is pretty self-explanatory to most of you. It works very similar to a bicycle. So that's how the kickstand works. But here is the center stand. You push down on this, and then you kind of push and lift up. It's going to be sort of difficult for me to do this with one foot, or hand rather, but that's kind of how you do that. You push down on this and lift up. So, not that I was moving to those features yet, but I figured I'd show them to you now since I have to use them. So in order to get it started, if it won't start with the regular key start, is you can pull this lever out to the side there, and that's going to be your kick start. So we'll have our key to the on position, and then we will kick down on this firmly. And also, it's a good idea to squeeze the throttle a couple times, and it should start right up because I was just riding it earlier. Make sure to hold the brake while doing this. All right, and now we've got it started up. And now, with it running, we can go over some more features. So this is your kill switch. If it's over here with the circle and the arrow without the X through it, that'll allow it to start. If you push it over to the left, that'll kill the engine if it's running, or prevent the engine from starting if it is in that setting. I'm not going to do that, obviously, because we just had to kick start it to even get it going. So once you get it started, if you can get it started, you'll want to start checking some of these features. However, if you cannot get to this point, I would probably pass on the scooter. So, if you get to this point, next thing you want to check is the headlights. Most of them, the headlight will come on automatically. But since mine has been modified, I have it where the headlight can be turned on and off manually. And so as long as they can show you that the headlight works, then you should be good to go. You can see when I turn it on and off here, that's actually the brights because my low beam is not really very good. But you can see that they do both work, and there is some sort of a difference there. And so we'll turn that off. There's a running light here that's working. Many of them do not have working running light. And so we'll check the turn signals here. So there's that on the left side. We'll go ahead and check on the back. Definitely working. And so here's our turn signal switch. If we press in to cancel, you push over to the left for left, over to the right for right. And here's your indicators, both working. You can see your right side turn signals, both working. Another good thing to check is your brake light from both handles, not just this side, but this side. And those are all working. And it's good to know that because these are actually automatic transmissions. There is no clutch, so you have a rear brake on the left side and a front brake on the right side. And of course over here is your high and low beam. On my particular one, I have heated grips here that can be adjusted on the temperature setting. Once again, the turn signal. Next one down on the opposite of our starter switch and kill switch that we've gone over, that's going to be our horn. That works fairly well. And then of course I've got heated seat and headlight switch on and off. And most of these are of course not going to have that. However, if you are happening to buy one with some aftermarket features, it is a good idea to make sure they work, such as this. Maybe go ahead and plug a phone into it, make sure it actually is charging. In a lot of cases you can see it's working because there's usually a little blue light down in there. And then like this windshield, for example, make sure it's nice and tight and sturdy. Make sure the mirrors aren't very loose, because that's another huge issue with these, is the mirrors can definitely get pretty loose, and sometimes the angle of the mirrors is not very good at all, to be quite honest. So in regards to the features of the scooter and how to check them, I think that is pretty much it on that. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is take it on a road test. Make sure that your speedometer is working. Make sure all of your indicators are working. Make sure that both brakes are working on both sides. And maybe give it a little bounce, you know, make sure that the suspension feels good and it's not bottoming out and things like that. Another thing you want to do is really give it full throttle. And what that's going to do is tell you how fast it is and maybe give you an indication of if it's got a big bore kit or if it's got a stock engine. Speaking of the engine, the next thing you want to look at is the engine. You can look at this before the road test, but part of the reason you're going to look at a scooter is because you want to ride one. So you might as well take that test ride and then look at it, see if you like it or not. And here's the air filter. If you happen to have a screwdriver on you, you can take that off and take a look at it. But ultimately, regardless of what that looks like, that wouldn't necessarily stop me from buying it. Plus, to be honest with you, I don't know if I've ever seen one of these air filters get dirty. If it's got one of them cone type air filters on it, I wouldn't necessarily turn it down, but I would put that in the trash immediately and get you a stock air box if you do end up buying the scooter. Here's your transmission case and your kickstart lever. Just look for any cracks in that thing. Hopefully it's good to go. And then that's pretty much all there is to the engine on this particular side. Also, you want to take a look at the brakes. Unfortunately, the rear one is a drum brake where the backing plate is built into the differential housing, and the drum itself is actually the wheel. So you'd actually have to take off the wheel in order to check the drum brakes. So if you buy the scooter, that's probably something you'll have to do when you get home, unfortunately. And you do have to remove the exhaust in most cases to get the rear wheel off, unless it has aftermarket exhaust like this one. I'm pretty sure I've taken the wheel off with the exhaust still on with this current setup. But if it has the stock exhaust, unfortunately, you do have to remove the exhaust, which is like 2 bolts around here. And then, of course, the 2 bolts where it connects to the engine. Then you got to get a new gasket for the exhaust, and it's a huge pain in the ass just to check or change the rear brakes. But if they're squeaking on you during the road test, you may want to look into that. So here's the other side. You can kind of see that my fan shroud has got a little piece broken out of it. That was not intentional. Something must have just come up and hit it. So here's your ignition coil. You can kind of take a look at that. Hopefully the boot is still intact on there, keeping moisture and everything out of it. And then here is your starter. You can see that, see if that's connected good, and make sure it's not all rusty or bad shape. And then here's, of course, your engine oil. And in order to check this properly, I don't have a rag with me, but you'll want to wipe that off and then dip it in. Don't thread it down, and then check it. You want to make sure that it has oil in it, and then maybe wipe a little off on a rag or on your finger and see how dark it is. But that is how you check the oil on a GY6. This is also the drain plug, or one of them anyway. You'll want to kind of check around that area and check for oil leaks. And otherwise, that's about all there really is to checking the engine. One thing you probably will also have to wait till you get home to check, but it is something to keep in mind. There is a separate fluid that is not engine oil back here. It is gear oil. This top bolt of the two you can see in the picture is the fill plug, and then this one here is the drain plug. So there is gear oil in the back that you will want to change periodically. And if you're buying a used one, it's definitely a good idea to check that. This here is also an adjustment for the tightness of your rear brakes. Just take a look at that, make sure it's there, make sure it's not broken. So some of these are going to have a drum brake on the front, but many of them have a disc as well. So you'll definitely want to just kind of take a look at the rotor, make sure it hasn't been ground into, make sure it feels smooth on both sides. Get a good look at the pads, which they're kind of difficult to see, but if you get a flashlight and you're familiar with checking the brakes on a car, then you pretty much check that in a similar manner. You get a flashlight, you kind of look in here or maybe from underneath, and you can get an idea of the brake pad thickness. And then you also want to check for leaks around your brake hose here, as well as up here where the master cylinder is located. There could potentially be some brake leaks in there. Sometimes that's the cover is exposed. There's a rectangular cover with a couple of screws on it that's in this area. Sometimes you'll be able to see that right off the bat, and that's where you'll add and replace your brake fluid, is underneath here. But in my case, I have to take this off to see that. But in other cases, if the owner is okay with it, you may pop that off, make sure it's got enough fluid in it, make sure the fluid's not all dark and stuff like that. All right, so one last thing we didn't really go over is you want to make sure that all of your latches and locks are working properly. Make sure your seat closes up, keys work, all that good stuff. That's the seat. Not all of them are going to have one of these trunks, but of course you'll want to check that too. This one's a little different than the seat because it just kind of has a hook and it goes through there. But if you're looking at buying one of these, it's a good idea to make sure that all of that works as well. And that's going to be the end of the video for today, guys. Hope you learned something, and hopefully this video helps you out if you're considering purchasing a scooter of your own. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to hit 3,000 subs by the end of 2024. Otherwise, like and comment below, and stay tuned for many more awesome videos on the Andy's Auto YouTube channel. I'm Andy, signing off.